All right, so we're going to move to Lev Vygotsky. And so he was born in 1896 and then died in 1934 of a uh, bronchitis or something with his lungs. So he was born in the Soviet Union. Um, and then his major contribution to education was called sociocultural learning theory. Functionally, what this is, it's basically saying that social and cultural factors play an enormous role in children's cognitive growth. Obviously, both with Piaget and Vygotsky, there's a lot more into it than just this. Um, if you're interested, you know, please do read more about them. Um, so he has eight basic assumptions, and I'm going to go quickly through these. But basically, adults tell children either explicitly or implicitly how to respond to the world, and that is a rough mirror on how the culture interprets and responds to the world. And so every culture will give their children physical and cognitive tools that make daily living more productive and efficient. Um, and so their children's thought and language become increasingly interdependent from the first few years of life. So it starts more separate, but as you learn more, the way you think is increasingly influenced by your language and by the schemas that that creates for you. Um, and then in terms of education, right? So Vygotsky viewed the complex mental processes would begin as social activities. So it would begin externally, and as the child learns, it would become more and more internal. And when it's there, then the children can do it independently. And so children will appropriate their culture's tools in their own idiosyncratic manner, just meaning their own dispositions, their own interests, their own contexts will influence how they apply their culture's tools. And so children can do more with others than on their own. Challenging tasks promote cognitive growth. And then the last one, play is important. It's not just fun for children, but it also helps them to grow and to learn in important ways. The individual concept that Vygotsky is most famous for is the zone of proximal development. And basically, it's past what a child can do by themselves, but they can do it with help and guidance from others. And so this is basically a form of scaffolding, which we'll uh, briefly touch on later. So there's two common critiques of Piaget and Vygotsky, and um, basically Piaget underestimated what children are capable of while overestimating what adults are capable of. Um, so the stages that he hypothesized are not so strict with the ages. There's a lot of other things that influence. It's not a pure biological factor, right? It's also have your learning, your progression, your development is heavily influenced by the environment as well. So those stages are not like 100% like accurate. Younger children can think concretely. Younger children have shown the ability to have what formal operations thoughts. Um, but it's just the broad picture. So that's one critique of Piaget. The other is overestimating what adults are capable of. Um, we're all adults. We don't always think abstractly about things. We might be thinking very concretely when the situation calls for us to think abstractly. And you can just look at any hot button issue to show that plenty of evidence that adults are not always using what Piaget labeled as formal operations. And then Vygotsky. So the main critique against him is that his descriptions are so vague that it's almost impossible to prove he was right, while it's also almost impossible to prove that he was wrong. Um, so that's a major critique, but a lot of his ideas have been made more specific by others, and there's a good foundation. All right, so what I want to end with is scaffolding. And so basically, scaffolding is the process of a more competent individual guiding a student through a complex task. Now, complex task means it's complex for that student. Um, so if you are really good at math, multiplication is not a complex task. If you're introducing a child to uh, multiplication, it's extremely complex and extremely abstract, right? And so scaffolding is basically it's a modern label for zone of proximal development. And then there are some more developed approaches to scaffolding. So one is called guided apprenticeship. And so as um, the guided and cognitive apprenticeship kind of imply, these labels are drawing from, apprenticeship, where a novice, would go into like a master blacksmith, um, and would work to be their apprentice and would learn other under them. So guided apprenticeship, right, is the more novice individual comes alongside an adult or more experienced peer and works with them. For cognitive apprenticeship, it might be less physical, but it's just still working with the more knowledgeable other to learn and to basically not just how they do the task, but how to think about the task. All right.